Elizabeth are talking, and Elizabeth shows up at Pemberley Manor Estate, same thing. And Elizabeth, she's getting a little embarrassed, and she keeps blushing, turning red and stuff, because she's vexated, and it shows her inner feelings and reveals them. And that's pretty much what happens there.
Let's see, authors. Keep going.
All right. Being embarrassing,
Why would the author want to show that?
because that's the neoclassical era. It's all about being sensible and keeping a propriety and not showing your
Is it
inner.
bad that she's losing control?
Yeah, that's a bad thing.
Okay. Anybody else in your group?
Yes.
You could also notice that Darcy too blushes throughout this. It's not just Elizabeth. They're both taken by surprise and seeing each other. They weren't expecting it. So we discussed this at an earlier date with Mr. Frank about how because they've had this meeting where they're not expecting it, it makes it harder for them to control themselves and hide their emotions and plan what they're going to say. So the blush is an actual physical sign of what they're feeling inside. Care to add anything?
Not really. I kind of like being interviewed, though. I think that this is Elizabeth's actual prejudice is gone.
There's been a shift. There's been a shift.
Does anyone else have a comment, like you might agree or disagree with some statements about the role of the emotion here? Don't start until I turn the thing, but let's get ready. We got you.
Okay. I think Austen also uses the emotion to add more depth to the characters and show that there isn't just black and white, because, Mrs. Bennet is overly emotional and Mr. Bennet isn't, emotional at all, really.
Well, not
And there is a healthy in-between.
Well, that's a different section, but... Well, I'm talking about Elizabeth.
But Elizabeth and Darcy are having an in-between of not being so emotionally constrained, being able to express their emotions without being one or the other.
Clarify that. It was hard to follow. Do it one more time.
Elizabeth and Darcy are in the middle. They're not overly emotional like Mrs. Bennet, or not emotional at all. There's a healthy balance.
Okay. So we see emotion here, but it's not bad. And you said at the beginning it's bringing out like some life in the characters, and so it's kind of a good thing here.
Yes.
Well, they said it was bad.
Well,
Okay. So we're going to move on to group 2. Where are you? Okay, we're here. Good. So introduce us to your section.
In this section, Darcy and Elizabeth are talking about the situation with Lydia and Wickham, and they're both very upset about it. And it's pretty obvious that Darcy, who normally doesn't show emotion, is distraught, and so is Elizabeth. And Austen's purpose in writing this is that it characterizes both Darcy and Elizabeth, who are normally hide their emotion when they're together, but in this scene we see that it's kind of like they're both upset by the same thing, so they're in it together, and that is kind of like, it's very joining, and it takes down walls that normally hide emotion, where they usually put on airs or images in front of each other, and so it kind of strips that away, and you just see kind of the bare bones, and that's really important, and that's why she wrote that.
Nice. Any other comments on that section? That was meaningful. Okay, group 3. Thank you. Okay.
All right, this section focuses on it's like the return of Mr. Bennett after he went to London to go look for Lydia when Wickham and then went away. It pretty much focuses on like the reaction of the Bennett parents, mainly Mr. Bennett. In this section, you kind of really see him get angry, you see him get really upset. He's kind of putting a lot of blame on himself. I think it's Elizabeth mainly, tries telling him, you should take it easy on yourself, don't get too hard. And one of the quotes he says was, "You may warn me well against such an evil. Human nature is so prone to fall into it. No, Lizzie, let me once in my life feel how much I have been to blame." It's kind of like a showing of how much emotion he's going through. And like Austin really presents that like through the tone that she kind of uses in the text. Through some words, like how she wrote down the like once in my life, makes it feel like he's really kind of actually hitting it. It's hitting him hard, and it's.
What's Austin's purpose in focusing on Mr. Bennett, revealing that inside of him?
I couldn't really I don't really know like the exact purpose behind it.
Yeah. Are you done though?
Much good.
Okay. They'll get a comment in response to their point. Oops, I have to turn that one. Okay. Kevin?
Her purpose for showing that Mr. Bennett, his release of all that emotion in light of Lydia's elopement with Wickham, is to show that even for such a character who is perceived to have no emotion, is perceived to be only strictly logical, that you can't truly erase the human quality of emotion from your character through constantly suppressing that emotion.
Okay. Well, it does make him a little more interesting because he's so much of one type until that point. All right.
I think it shows that he really does care about what's going on in his family. Because we often see him and he's unconcerned about everything that's going on. And, Lydia acting crazy, his wife freaking out. Their home going to Mr. Collins when he dies. When we normally see he doesn't really care about it, but now it kind of lets us in his head, and we see that he does care about his family, and that kind of makes us like him a little bit more.
Right. Later on, he actually reverts. He doesn't stay so caring. But so that's another complication. But all right, let's move on to group 4. Is it? I have to check the time here, but you're okay. No, I'll move this.
So this section begins after Lydia just returns home from running off with Wickham, and due to that fact, it forces Elizabeth to begin to think about her possible future with Darcy because of how much they've bonded over this situation, and she turns out to realize that he actually is perfect for her.
I mean, it's somewhat like the resolution of all the tension from before, so we can say we haven't talked about plot much.
Mm-hmm.
we talk about characterization and theme, like some of the bigger elements, but implied, there has to be a lot of tension rising, and then there's resolution. So we're finally getting some of that. But were there any other purposes? No?
His Majesty would not like to speak.
All right. So we're done with your group, I guess. So group 5. Okay, last group. It is kind of nice that we can fit this all onto one 15-minute video. So. Very cumbersome. Who's speaking here?
I will.
Okay, tell us what's going on. Don't worry about that.
So in this section, this is where Lady Catherine confronts Elizabeth about her and Darcy's kind of supposed romance, and Lady Catherine is able to, detect this, and she really does not want, Darcy to marry Elizabeth. But here, Elizabeth really shows her strength of character. This is probably the most highlighted part of the book where, human qualities and emotion are put, above, what the upper class, quote unquote, would want. So it's where Austen really highlights romanticism in Elizabeth, that she really, disregards what a lot of people, her superiors, would want. But it also, an interesting point, it might foreshadow that Elizabeth would soon, later in her life, be also on the same level as Lady Catherine if she were to marry Darcy and be her related to Lady Catherine and be of the same wealth and stature. So it does show that she has a strength of character to be there.
Good. Anything else from your group? Any other comments of the class? There's more to bring out in that one, like some detail from it, but you got the purpose of it though. So we're going to stop.